everyone, and welcome to our We Got This WA webinar series. It's a little bit cloudy here where I am, but I hope that everybody is having a wonderful day so far, and hopefully the sun will come out for the long weekend and we can all get a little bit of fresh air and enjoy it. My name is Sarah Child. I am the Executive Director at the Business Health Trust and also work with the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce. And I really love being part of this series because the goal is to bring experts on topics that are really applicable for leaders and businesses across the state, but specifically in the King County or Tri-County area with Snohomish and Pierce County as well, so that people can hear directly from experts about what's going on and things that are going to affect all of us as we are continuing to increase economic activity in this area. A few webinar logistics before we get started. If you need technical help, please use the chat box, and we will do our best to help resolve issues as they come up. If you have questions for our speaker today, which I hope everyone has a chance to ask a few questions on this really important topic of going back to schools in the fall, use the Q&A button. That will allow us to manage the questions best and make sure we can get to as many as possible. So before I invite Chris to turn on his video, I wanted to just take a moment to talk about kind of where we're at right now as a society within the state of Washington, and specifically in King County, which is where the Seattle Metro Chamber is at. Right now, we're looking at infection rates that are pretty close and trending up to where we were when the economy was shut down. And as we continue to fight COVID-19 together, we're at a critical junction. We are needing as businesses, and we are asking the businesses on this call and to also reach out to those in your life that have influence and can be leaders in this area to help lead the way and encourage employees to practice safety measures, both in the workplace and their personal lives, especially as we go into the holiday weekend. We are really committed to creating a safer, stronger, and healthier community, and we think that that can be done simultaneously to building an economy back to where it was before. So we here at Business Health Trust, in partnership with the Chamber, have created hopefully a very fun way for you to have a conversation with your employees about using masks, not just in the work environment, but also in personal lives. So in our event follow-up today, there will be some text that you can send out to your employees, and I also just put it in the chat. But we are running a contest or a fun thing to do on social media on Facebook, where anyone can win a $100 Amazon gift card simply for posting a photo of yourself wearing a mask and tagging at Business Health Trust. There will be many drawings through the 6th and the 10th of July, so next week. And our goal really is to have people see that, you know, this is part of how we can each individually contribute to the reduction of infection rates and keep each other healthy and safe. If your company or you personally are having a difficult time finding masks, please reach out to us, to the Chamber or to Business Health Trust. We want to be part of the solution, and we want to be supporting our employers. So on that, with that, I will invite Chris to turn on his video. Chris, thank you so much for being with us. I am really excited about this conversation. I have a kindergartner who will start in the fall. So I'm very eager to see where our district ends up and what the future is looking like for schools. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Let's get started here. Thank you everybody for your time today. Gosh, the day before a holiday weekend here, this is a little bit like the Sunday morning speaker on a 4-day conference when everyone's flown home already. So if you're out there, you are the loyal listeners who want to know about public education and reopening, so I'm grateful to you. Also just hope everyone has a great and safe holiday weekend. You heard really clearly here, it is all about our hand hygiene, it is all about face coverings and our physical distancing, and we can keep the numbers under control and manageable, and obviously move to open the economy and hopefully schools this fall. So Let's get into it. I thought I'd share a little bit with you all about kind of just a reminder of where we've been, right? It seems like we've been doing this for years. It has only been since the middle of March when things really, really transformed in our state. Ultimately, our governor was one of the first, probably 3 or 4 states to close schools. Initially, it was going to be for a period of 5 or 6 weeks, and ultimately the decision to close for the rest of the year. All of the states ultimately closed for the rest of the year. We ended up with about 53 million kids across the country who didn't have a traditional school environment for the last 10 or 12 weeks. It was 1.6 billion students worldwide at the time. A few countries have come back, and we're watching those to see what they did, how they do it. Unfortunately, a few attempted to come back and have subsequently reclosed on the Pacific Rim because they definitely thought they could strike this balance between a traditional sort of open environment with kids, believing, of course, much of the science about the epidemiology and the lower impact on kids. But I think what's emerging now is what is smart for adults is smart for kids. Physical distancing, hand hygiene, face coverings, and more. So those countries are having to revisit a little bit of that. It's not that the disease is necessarily more prevalent in kids, probably a little less. Or it is that they are more asymptomatic because just the way their body tissue absorbs the virus in many ways, I think people have come to conclude is just less impactful. Doesn't mean our kids don't have it. We're seeing some parts of the East Coast now where youth under the age of 20, the numbers are coming up, and thankfully they're not super impactful from a health standpoint for the child, but clearly they are able to have this virus and spread it. And so we are taking all these precautions. While all this occurred in March and into early April, districts kind of had to flip a switch and try to go to remote learning. Now, I want to set the stage for you all. Some of you are involved in companies that took 5 years or 10 years, or some of you even longer, to really build out commerce models at a distance. It is a lot about logistics and distribution. It's all about customer engagement and retention. There's a lot of complexity in that world versus a traditional face-to-face world. And while the basics could be delivered, a relationship building is not very effective with young kids at that age, and particularly K through 6. We're doing a lot of language and reading skill development at that age. I know it sounds a little wonky here, but actually physically being in space to hear sound, watching the mouth movements and mouth expressions of a teacher actually impart how students enunciate letters and combinations of letters. And so there's a science to being face-to-face that is lost in many ways at a distance. And so we know high school kids had a better opportunity to learn, even if maybe they stayed up till 2 in the morning and played Fortnite every night. I'm not saying that was my kid, Carter. But the younger kids, really, this is not a good environment for them to be in on a permanent basis. And so districts did what they could. We had never designed a fully online model, and we wouldn't from scratch today, that's for sure. What I think did happen is we identified where there were a lot of gaps in public education and private, because they were shut down as well. And what it's going to take as we reimagine a world where we both open, but in combination, be prepared for more distance learning. And what I continue to tell everybody is, let's get to that model where all those supports exist. Our face-to-face model is great for cognitive development. It is also great for social emotional learning. It's where we bring nutritional supports to kids, mental health supports, increasingly physical internal medicine clinics in some of our school districts as they build community-based models in schools. So we built something here that just isn't replicated well online. At the same time, though, as we've opened up graduation pathways, and I've pushed and pushed and pushed the legislature to think about the junior and senior years so dramatically different, if we lose this moment to reshift those dollars in the junior senior year, which incidentally is about $2 billion we spend every year between juniors and seniors combined. So it's 155,000 kids. We spend about $2 billion on them. It is the greatest opportunity we have for significant transformation, reform, and education to both move them online where that's comfortable, get them into more dual credit programs, give them more flexibility for those who have to work. This is a moment where we should have learned that some kids, even 16, 17, 18-year-olds, really need the school setting, but tens of thousands of them really don't if we give them a really functional way to receive supports in a pathway system that works better for them. So kind of back to where we were. We shut down school, we went to these models, tremendous success in some places, candidly, terrible results, certainly in the beginning for some districts. They didn't have the tech, they didn't have the connectivity, they didn't have the professional development for their staff. Of course, parents have an entire role in this, and generally they send kids away, and many of them go to work. And in this environment, they were at home, staying at home, competing for broadband and connectivity and devices and time, right? Because you still want to facilitate.
It was tough. Sometimes there were so many Zoom meetings going on in our house, even with preschool. I was like, okay, I have a webinar. No one can do online school right now.
Yeah, it was something. And, you know, I got a lot of feedback from parents that, you know, mostly constructive and compassionate and sort of graceful, but also, hey, I didn't train for this. If I wanted to be a teacher, I'd have gone that route. So let's get this thing figured out and get kids back to school. So let's speed up now. Governor makes a decision here to let his closure order expire. So starting already a couple weeks ago, we began to bring some services back to our schools for the summer. A lot of this is traditional stuff, Boys and Girls Clubs, the Y Cares trying to build childcare back in the system. They use our facilities in the summer, camps and clinics, and then some individual supports for kids. We always have programs in parts of the state, particularly for students with disabilities who really need a continuity of support even through the summer. And so some of that is starting to return. We have built reopening guidance for the school districts. We have said pretty clearly our primary goal is to open schools face-to-face, but I want to be very clear about that. It is rarely going to be the case where every single student can come back face-to-face. We are under 5 major components of public health requirements as part of this planning effort. First and foremost is facial coverings, which we talked a little bit about earlier. It's science, not politics. That's my message for everybody. Like, let go of the ideology about this. We have got to all be Americans and Washingtonians right now looking out for each other, and it is a huge strategy to make sure we keep caseload down and keep the economy reopening and keep schools as an option here. So face coverings, physical distancing is a big one. Our Department of Health has established a 6-foot framework, and what we mean by framework is when the bell rings and everyone sits down, they really need to be 6 feet apart. That is not an option in schools to do less than that at this point. But they recognize in public health that teachers are going to move around and kids are going to get up to a whiteboard and they're going to occasionally work together. They're going to pass each other in hallways. So it's not an every moment 6-foot thing. That is a little ridiculous and no one could actually implement that. But as a planning framework, it needs to be 6 feet. That reduces the density of students and significantly reduces the probability of droplets, either through aerosol getting to another person or hitting a contact surface, somebody else touching it, then touching the face, the eyes, the mouth, and suddenly they're getting a virus. So those are the 2 big ones that have got sort of ideology wrapped around them. The Department of Health says we need you 6 feet apart and wearing face covering. The other 3 components for us are screening. So either a home attestation every morning by families or something that the school does when kids come in and they screen them, but some place will be screening in a formal attestation, including a temperature check. So face covering, distance, screening, cleaning is the 4th one, a big cleaning regimen in our schools. And then the last one is hand hygiene, hand washing. It seems simple, and we do a really good job in elementary school. We got these awesome regiments, and we teach kids and like go to recess, come back, lunch, we're excellent. By middle school, we're like, you're 14, just like whatever.
Just wash your hands.
just wear deodorant or do anything, right? Our middle schoolers are such an interesting group. I just finished 2 middle schoolers, and now I've got 2 high schoolers this year, finally. But we've got to have hand hygiene regimens for the adults, for our high school kids, our middle schoolers. That's a 5th element of this that's really key. So that's the health stuff. And the districts are in a planning process right now to ensure they can meet those requirements. The 6 foot of distancing is a big logistical challenge. Like some of you in the restaurant side, when you can only have, you know, every other table available, it just reduces your capacity. So you're building other models, right? You're still in delivery, right? You're still using partners to deliver food to homes and businesses. And that's what most of our schools find themselves thinking about, how to bring as many students as they can, but they can't accommodate them all through physical distancing because they literally run out of certificated teachers when you go from, say, 28 kids to 20 in classrooms to meet the physical distancing. Even if you use gyms and cafeterias, you eventually run out of teachers. And so you don't probably see a scenario where, particularly in the Snohomish, King, and Pierce County area, where every student can come back all the time on every day. You're seeing hybrid models and alternating schedules, which is still logistically challenging for families and childcare. We know this. But that's kind of the planning framework. The last thing I'll say about it is our districts are also tasked with building more robust online learning models at the exact same time. There's a group of families who don't want to show up. They don't feel safe. B, there's a group of families who say, I'm not sending my kid if they have to wear a face covering. Okay, that's a reality. And C, most of them either can't accommodate all kids or they're preparing for a moment where there's a breakout. There's a case spike in an area and the school has to shut down. So we are in the process of really narrowing in on student learning management systems, doing professional development of teachers so they now get time to actually learn what it is like to teach online instead of just thrusting them into it, trying to engage families around those learning management systems, and districts are building a lot more formal schedules around it. You're going to see some of them say, I'm bringing all my K-6s back every day. Even if I have to use my middle schools and high schools, that's my priority, and I'm going to put more of the learning at a distance responsibility on my middle schoolers and my high schoolers. Some districts are going to say, no, every kid every other day, because we want all students to have a face-to-face touch. We'll load them up with the work and have an independent emphasis for the time that they are at home. They're all navigating this and very carefully. So those are the big ones. That's what reopening looks like. That's kind of the challenge we face. We think budgets are relatively stable for K-12 because it's pretty well locked down on the Constitution. Very little federal money is coming our way. It's the equivalent of a little over 1% of our budgets. And we understand that if there's another federal act, the legislature is likely to just grab it before it gets to us and use it to balance the budget. That's kind of what we are told at this point in time. So those are the big elements. You have so many questions, I'll bet, on the details of those elements, and I have answers to most of it. And where I don't, I will just sneak out of the room and you'll never know I was gone.
Yeah, one of the things I just want to highlight that you said is, coming from a business perspective, a lot of companies, not all, but a lot of companies already had technology in place. Had the pandemic hit 5 years ago, I know even the chamber, we'd be in a much different position for how we communicate in webinars. Those things just didn't exist. And so just remembering, especially myself as a parent, remembering that the school district was building all of this while still trying to figure out how to adapt to this world, I think is just an important thing for us to all keep in mind as we continue to move forward together in this. So a couple questions for you. One, how can parents advocate with their own districts on reopening, since many decisions will be made locally and public engagement is on the low side during COVID-19?
It's an awesome question. One of the things we require in the reopening plans for districts is that they have community engagement processes. They must bring their plan through their boards as a public vote so that there's a public document available for everyone if they don't feel like they got an engagement in the process. And then ultimately all those will be on file here at OSPI and the State Board of Education so that we can do some analysis of what's happening statewide. We won't be approving or rejecting them. Local school boards will be doing that. Obviously, if they don't meet a health requirement, then that's another story. But you really should engage them now. What does your planning committee look like? Who's at the table? How can I be involved? In some cases, districts are way down the road, right? Just amazing leadership. And others have been kind of waiting to see how this plays out, see if Department of Health changes their mind on a few things. But yeah, there's a formal requirement for districts in this. And so make those phone calls and reach out to folks.
Yeah, that's good. As parents, we need to be involved and be part of that conversation for sure. As you're considering access to in-person instruction, what are some of the ways you're centering on equity concerns and ability to access technology with an equity lens?
Yeah, one of the things we tasked districts with this spring is to do an inventory of those who did not connect well. And that can happen for a lot of reasons, right? Family doesn't have access or family does, and all the competition with parents and all that. Or maybe language access barriers, or maybe they're a student with a disability and they have a IEP and it just wasn't well served. Maybe it's a personal therapy, a physical therapy that couldn't really be done at a distance or safely. Districts are tasked with identifying who those students are and making a priority about them and their return. So if districts say, hey, I only have capacity with the physical distancing to bring back 70% of my students, what we would expect to see in their reopening plans is that they've made a priority out of the students who really need it because they don't have connectivity or the supports that they need really have to happen in person. That's the kind of contemplation that districts need to be doing right now. And there's a lot of discussion statewide about that because, there are legitimate needs for families who weren't connected. And then there are just folks who say, I was connected, but I still didn't like the experience and I want my kid to go back. And so trying to mirror that with a legitimate reality that some of our employees are entitled to some options because they're high risk. And labor and industries is kind of paying attention to us now. We've kind of been off their radar. We're going to have teachers who really can't be back in the classroom. So aligning the right teachers with the families who want to be at a distance or who we have to have at a distance, getting that all lined up right now is, it's like writing a business plan for something that's already a $13 billion model, right? It's not a little baby startup. Some of these districts are huge with huge companies.
So let's talk about school buses. What are some of the requirements or recommendations around use of school buses for the fall?
Yeah, so Department of Health has been incredibly flexible in understanding that if we're going to create this opportunity to return kids to school in some form and get them to their basic ed rights, that 6 foot of distancing on a bus doesn't work. That would literally cost us an extra $400 or $500 million to run a bus system where it's multiple routes a day. So they've said we can make exceptions for buses because we have these multiple layers of protection. You're cleaning it frequently, you're protecting the driver, you've got good ventilation on it, you've got hand hygiene practices, you're screening kids, they're wearing face coverings. And if you run your bus routes just a little differently, then the kids who are on it the longest are actually most remote and least likely to be with other kids for the longest periods of time. Kind of that logic of as you approach the school in the morning or leave in the afternoon full, they want those buses full for 15 or 20 minutes or less. But by the time you drop a few kids off, then the distancing can really happen. So they're flexible about this. It's one of those exceptions they make to the 6 foot rule for a period of time that makes sense because it's a right for kids to have access to school and transportation. But you will see districts change their model a little. You're going to see them encouraging you to ride a bike, stay with families, get dropped off, maybe even expand their little pickup ring around the facilities and put a little more responsibility on some parents to bring their kids.
Great. So talking about childcare a little bit, obviously there's a concern around changes needed in childcare to accommodate changes in the school schedule or who's going back and when, especially when a lot of childcare before and after school centers around at the school facilities. So will those schools be looking to, possibly take back some of the space that typically has some of that before and after school? What are some thoughts about what might happen in this area?
Really depends on the district and how they approach it. Again, the contracts, right? So the contracts for our educators won't be dramatically different, although you're going to see some calendars really stretch out this year. But you're generally going to have mornings that are still free in your buildings and afternoons. So I would expect before and after school care, assuming they can follow all the health requirements, to be pretty robust still. I think the harder part is what happens during the day if you're an alternating schedule district where you can't accommodate them. So you've got a lot of students at home every other day. That's just really tough for parents, right? The same thing that happens during a spring break or 10 and a half week summer break, you just scramble. So that's why we wanted to get this out in June and have districts be really transparent with their communities and say, we're one that's probably not going to be able to get every kid in. So everyone get ready here. Very, very complicated. I will just say this as an editorial. If we did get more federal stimulus, I have told the governor this and others, their priority needs to be childcare. Our state pretty well protects K-12. We need lots of subsidies for families who are going to need childcare options to get back to work on the days their kids really cannot be at school because we can't accommodate them, which means it isn't just childcare, but it's childcare with technology access, right? So they are connected. We're rewriting history here. That's the challenge.
Yeah. Lots of things to think through for sure. So if somebody has a question and kind of just sharing their experience of online learning this year, it sounds like, they had a struggle where the district or the teachers didn't provide a lot of feedback to elementary students because of, it not being equitable for all students to participate and, from their perspective created some challenges to be the interim teacher, right? And not know kind of the areas that they needed to hone in on. How could this be improved, or will there be some sort of feedback loop for the online environment if some districts do have that online learning?
Yeah, well, again, each district is deploying this. That's why we elect local school boards. I think on the front end, it's really important that families engage and demonstrate how frustrating this was. And I think what I'm observing now is school districts who say we get it. So we're going to limit the amount of time kids need to be in contact with teachers at a distance, which is why a lot of them are picking, this model of either I'm bringing all the K-6s back every day, all day, because that's the real childcare crunch.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're saying, even when I'm in an alternating environment, every other day, your kid's going to be here face to face, get that direct feedback, right? Because by then you've even got smaller class sizes. The work that gets done at home will be significantly more independent, but we won't go these long periods of time without kids being in direct contact with feedback and support from teachers. So that's the tricky sort of pedagogy that's happening.
Yeah, that's a great kind of loop back to, there will be that in-person ability for somebody to get that feedback in real time as a student, and then hopefully the interaction with the parents as well. Are there any guidelines for highly impacted special education students, for example, not being able to keep 6-foot distance or hand-over-hand teaching, the need for face-to-face services for speech and reading services?
Yeah, so we've issued some additional guidance for families and students with disabilities. We've kind of connected with DOH as recently as yesterday to say to them, hey, let's remember that your exceptions have to be really practical in our schools. And there are times where our students need therapies and supports that are going to be absolutely within 6 feet, like even sometimes physical. So their message is absolutely, that is not prohibited. Where you can't accommodate that with face coverings and hand hygiene isn't enough, you need to provide additional PPE.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be gloves, right? It might be that the student needs something as well. And so from the Department of Health perspective, it's go forward, move forward. This is not an absolute 6-foot rule when the learning requires something less, but make sure you're ready to accommodate additional protections so that we don't increase risk here.
Yeah. What can the business community do to help support the safe reopening of schools in the fall?
Yeah, well, I've talked with a lot of you, big and small, in various parts of the state. I know it sounds a little weird now, but honestly, if you had a really aggressive message right now around face coverings and hand hygiene, part of this is getting young people and their parents comfortable with the idea that for the next year in the United States, we're just not going to look like we did the last 100 years.
Yeah.
Some of those liberties and freedoms we love are just going to be different, right? And part of our message is we make you wear goggles during science class, and you have to wear closed-toed shoes during PE. Like, there are some health and safety things we require already. This is just a little more onerous, right? Because it's more fun. But getting that culture established now makes September easier for us. Obviously, anything you can do to push your local school district on a sort of graceful way of saying we want this option and we're willing to help. And we also know that we got to be flexible.
Right.
So there are people out there demanding every kid every day. Your districts cannot do it if there's a 6-foot distancing requirement. They literally run out of space, or by law certificated teachers in front of kids. And we're trying to emergency certify lots of people, so we're trying our best here. But between those two things and some of you who have really stepped up to help districts with technology access, it's just been awesome. So keep it up and bring your employees back as much as you can. We need the economic development to underwrite all of this, so that we all know that together. So we're trying to get school open for you all, and we know you're trying to open businesses to help parents afford what they need to get schools open. So it's a partnership.
Yeah, it's so interconnected, right? You need the economy open so that we can have the funding for schools. We need schools open so we can effectively have, working parents and a functional economy, not fighting for broadband on a daily basis as well. But going back to my message from the beginning, like this is an important tool that we can all use going, into the holiday weekend, through the summer, and we'll get used to it too. I didn't used to like wearing glasses. Well, I wear them every day, or contacts, and it helps, and you get used to it. So
yeah. So 2 more things on that. I mean, I'm always on camera. People are like, "Hey, he doesn't wear a mask." I'm not around anybody. I'm isolated, alone in my office.
Just me in my room here.
When I am outside, I am wearing this. We did look at 10 or 12 other countries, though, too, to see if this is a phenomenon. And I hate to be a little crass here about America, but we love our freedom so much that sometimes we make assumptions about kids that are not accurate. When you ask young people, your opportunity to learn is to wear a face covering, I think people will be surprised how much they're willing to do it. We just don't see compliance issues anywhere else in the world. So right now, we apparently have a little bit of an ideological adult problem that isn't yet evidence of a kid challenge. But if it's the case, we'll get there. And I should say, both students and the teachers have the option of a face shield if they don't want the cloth face cover. It's preferred because it absorbs droplets and better protection. But because of the teaching and learning process, DOH and Labor and Industries have both said a face shield can replace a cloth face covering. So there are even options for students.
Yeah, my soon-to-be kindergartner, he's been so excited to go to kindergarten for a whole year. You know, when do I get to go? When do I get to go? And we've had the conversation with him of, okay, well, if you want to go to kindergarten, you're going to have to wear a mask all day. And so, and he has repeated it many times over the last few weeks, and he practices, and, you know, he's very excited about it. And it's not 100% comfortable all the time, but he does understand, like, okay, I'm going to have to do this if I want to go to kindergarten, which I think is a good thing. And as parents and, you know, educators in life, we need to also be talking with our students in our lives about what this means and how we navigate it, and practicing and getting ready and setting expectations. So talking about masks a little bit, what is OSPI's guidance on students wearing masks? Will schools be able to send people home if they refuse to wear masks?
Yeah, so again, the mask requirement comes from the Department of Health, but we put it in our guidance so the districts don't have multiple agencies to navigate. Yeah, it's a requirement at this point in time. And so what DOH would say, of course, is there are exceptions, and we write those down. There are students with medical conditions that cause them to not be able to wear them, so maybe a face shield, and in some rare cases, they can't wear anything, and that's a very few students. But what we're telling districts is don't default to discipline. We've been working for 3 years hard on trying to get our discipline rules rewritten because they're so disproportionate for communities of color, particularly young Black males. So we don't want the default to be, we're kicking you out. The better practices on the front end, explain to parents why, right? Make the expectation, build that training like you're doing with your child as they prepare for kindergarten. And we do know there'll be some families who say, I'm not doing it. I'm just not going. So districts need to have an online learning option for those families or other choices. And I think they're doing a good job preparing those options. Ultimately, though, if a kid comes to school and they don't have a mask, they will be offered one because we will have supply for any kid who forgets theirs and all that. If they still absolutely refuse, then yes, we can remove students from classrooms. We still have an obligation to give them a learning plan. So we'll still identify learning opportunities for them. But this isn't the kind of thing where we can accommodate half of kids doing it, half not, out of some sort of ideological value set. It destroys the entire public health thing. And what we're seeing in parts of New York right now and Connecticut, who have tried to bring back some pretty aggressive summer school, is their cases are jumping. And they thought they could do it with fewer kids and avoid masks, and they can't. So
it's an important part of the equation for sure. As school districts are limiting the number of people in the building, how do you anticipate family engagement to continue, especially with Black and Brown families?
Well, again, it's part of our prioritization for districts. They're going to have to describe the gaps that they observed, and they've got an outreach requirement. And so they've also done some identification, not just the technology side, but where did the learning get most impacted. A lot of students got incompletes this year, right? We wiped out the F, but we did say it's okay not to give them a grade if they didn't demonstrate proficiency. Give them an incomplete, and then you have a responsibility to re-engage them. And so each district will still manage this locally, right? There's no statewide stuff we do. We don't have that kind of team here, but you really need to engage that local school district and ask them specifically, what is the plan for students who have been most distant from educational justice for a lot of reasons? How will you be intentional about it? And then we do have districts who are already creating jumpstart models this summer. So they're catching kids up or doing intensive math or intensive work with them, especially in the summer when we can be further apart in our rooms, so that we get kids ready to go for this fall. You're seeing that spring up in districts all around the state right now.
Many are concerned with equity in learning, especially districts with large groups of children of color and children living in poverty. What extra resources is the state providing to offset the differences between high and low achieving school districts?
Well, we get no additional appropriation from the legislature at this point. We do have this roughly $200 million in federal aid that has come. We have been able, the OFM's held on to some of it, but they've allowed us to push out 80% of that. We have told districts their priority are, of course, it's flexible. It's all things COVID impact, but we've said we want your number one priority to be families and students who you know are disproportionately underserved. So districts have a responsibility to do that. Ultimately, that's about, locals really keeping them accountable. And then we have an accounting system here where we will be tracking their expenditures. Where do they spend their money? What program areas? What objects did they spend it on? So we know how that money was spent. But again, it's barely over 1% of budgets. So the real challenge here is that we got to get the legislature not to cut budgets next year in any way. And then districts are going to have to repurpose and reorganize their money. I will say our state is a little progressive. We do actually spend more money per kid in lower income communities than we do wealthier communities, but barely. This is one of those things that's a little frustrating from the McCleary case because it was incredibly progressive. I mean, they were moving towards that. We have learning assistance money and targeted dollars, just amazing. And then at the last minute, they made a regionalization adjustment, which would totally make sense. A teacher in Seattle has a tough time affording life there, or Bellevue, Mercer Island, or even Everett, compared to a teacher in rural Washington. So at the last minute, the legislature put more money into compensation in high cost areas. It had the mathematical effect, however, of sending more money to the places with the highest home values, because that's consistent with cost of living. And they kind of neutralized it. So I can promise you that we are a state that does spend a little more money in high poverty communities, but it's not a lot more money. So as we turn this into a longer term contemplation, our entire push on the legislature for the last year, and will be for as long as I'm in the role, is new money has to be very focused on high poverty and English language learners, students with disabilities, communities of color. And we got close last year, for example. We finally got elementary school counselors, and we were going to target that in school buildings of high poverty, right? Highest needs, so that we have mental health as well as academic counselors there. And unfortunately, we got the money, but then it was subject to a veto. So we almost made the first big step on this progressive reach here.
Well, it sounds like, those businesses that have activities in Olympia, this would be a great way for them to engage and advocate for students, especially if they have equity concerns, to make sure that we can really serve all students and all people in Washington, which would be very, very needed. So, maybe we can partner on that later as we go into the session this fall.
Childcare, early learning, and then focus on K-12. I know it sounds weird. I'm supposed to say I want every dollar. I want universal access to early learning, and I want childcare taken care of, because it really underwrites us being successful in K-12.
I'm 100% with you. So one other question. So will children not wearing masks be required to provide documentation, like a doctor's note, or will that be up to the districts, or is that going to be a very small exception basis only?
Yeah, the way health wrote it, it's a really small exception, but it's open enough that a parent could interpret that as my kid has a medical condition or asthma or something. So anything they evidence of that, school districts can accommodate that. But I'm guessing most districts, kind of like vaccines, you'll have to demonstrate through medical evidence, a doctor or something, that there's an issue there. We do have some students who don't get vaccinations due to medical reasons, and that's well documented. Sidebar, we are a state that still allows a religious exemption to vaccinations, however. And so if the legislature goes that way on masks, you will see an unprecedented number of people who find scripture around not wearing masks, and that will be a stunningly remarkable day in the state of Washington. I'm not being cynical about that.
Yeah.
It's a big darn deal to some people. They believe it deeply, and I don't question their values or their beliefs per se. There's just not a mechanism right now for them to demonstrate their values on not wearing a mask. The way there is with vaccine, there's a formal process they fill out to say, I'm not going to get my kid vaccinated. We don't have anything like that right now, face covering.
Yeah. So let's talk about online learning, kind of going backwards in the conversation a little bit. What do you recommend for families who are too nervous to send kids into buildings until there's a vaccine? Talk about the work being done around online learning to make sure it's a viable option.
Yeah, obviously, you really want to connect with your school district. Say, what is your plan? Ask the schedule. The key here is that what is the formal learning schedule, so I know this time with a better plan when my kid's on, when they're going to have certain teachers, when it's open time for them to connect with educators. It was quite a free-for-all for the first 4 weeks this last time. Some teachers were ready the next day and others absolutely not. And a lot of it depended on whether your district was candidly property value high, where they had their own technology levies and all that, and other communities who just had very little. But connect with families or connect with schools about their formal plan. If you need technology, reach out to them now about connectivity. Obviously, if you're a family with multiple kids and there's competition there for technology, you're going to want to think about that a little bit on your end at the home side there. And then obviously, be really clear of your intentions. So if you're a family that says, hey, even if my school's going to be face-to-face or have an alternating schedule and I want to be home all day, you're actually going to be doing your districts a big favor to notify them really early, because they're trying to figure out how many families voluntarily don't want to be back so that they can accommodate the families who really do. And so communication.
Got it. That's really helpful to hear, and hopefully people will be able to engage with their school districts early and often and be part of this process so that we can come up with a really great fall and what that looks like in our new normal. Any parting words or something else that you wanted to make sure to communicate to those watching today before we wrap up?
Well, just like you all, it's a global pandemic and a health crisis first and foremost. A lot of us jump to our commerce side, our education side, or our higher ed side, and we're trying to solve something that actually, if it's a medical issue and we can get to a good vaccine and it gets adopted at scale, we don't necessarily have to spend billions of new dollars for something that hopefully is short term, but we got to be prepared in case it's longer than we think, thus the parallel planning. So I guess grace is the word I keep using, right? Our businesses have had to be stunningly flexible in this time with employees and their supply chains. And school districts are going through a little bit of the same thing right now, where they're getting it figured out, but this is a big transition for them. But we should also be unrelenting about our expectations that every family gets engaged in the process. It may not be every day for 6.5 hours, but you need regular engagement. And I guess the last thing I'd say is never undersell our kids. I think a lot of what I've heard of the last 14 weeks are parents trying to use their students as a manifestation of their own anxiety. And I do that, right? I'm nervous about this. I think our students are remarkably connected in ways we never were as kids. And so on one hand, they definitely missed out on something, right? As did virtually every child on the globe. But they connected in ways that kids in 1918 and 1919 didn't do. When that happened, influenza too, by the way, much more impactful. Mm-hmm. It was just isolation. Our kids stayed connected through Instagrams and Facebooks, and well, not Facebook, that's an old person's thing, but Snap and everything else, right? TikTok. They need academic support, but I think we'd be surprised how much they have maintained some continuity. Not all of them, of course. This was isolated, but I'm not understating it when I tell you, or overstating it. There are students who reached out to me and said, this is the best thing that ever happened. School wasn't the place that I felt very comfortable, and I love that there's this option for me now because I just wanted the academics and not the drama, right? Mm-hmm. So let's be careful about our generalizations that this has been sweepingly bad for all kids, right? What we need to do now is build a system that's more accommodating to lots of different family and parent choices. Most of them want to be back in buildings, not all of them. So we got to be flexible.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time and your insights and the wisdom and guidance that you can give to, folks like me that are looking at, what does the fall look like in our district and what are some of the things that I need to start thinking about as we make family decisions and communicate and engage on this topic. So thank you so very much, Chris. And a reminder for everyone watching and listening today that this was recorded and will be available on the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce website later today. And later today, you will also get a post-event link to that, as well as the information on how to promote the mask use through our Facebook campaign with your employees. So everyone stay healthy and safe, please, this holiday weekend so that we can continue to build economic activity here in the state. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.